Okay, so I would like to talk about two techniques that we need to do to prepare our tubes. We got the engine tube and the body tube. It turns out these techniques should be done on every single rocket build, and yet I seldom see them described ever, or many times it's just in passing. Yet they're very, very important for the construction of the actual rocket. The two techniques are called chamfering and CA treating. Now, the first one, chamfering, it's a carpentry term, and it means to take a square edge and bevel it down. So like if you have a table, you take the corner of it, you bevel it down, that's called chamfering. I've not seen it applied too often to the field of model rockets, only heard it once, but we will call it that for the purpose of this particular recording. You take your body tubes, or engine mount in this case, you put your finger on the inside, you find that there's actually a fairly sharp edge on this. And this is because of the manufacturing process, when the tubes are cut, there's probably some kind of a cutter that slices it, squeezes in, and it pushes the edge of the tube inward. Now, this can cause a problem over time. If you're inserting an engine, even though it inserts reasonably well right now, it'll catch this edge and begin tearing the tube inward and begins peeling it. I had this happen on another rocket before I heard of this technique. So the edge is going to make it difficult to insert your engine eventually, or it's going to start peeling away at the inside of your tube. So again, this chamfering is this edge, and it gets in the way of the construction of the rocket. And we'll see this is actually the same thing on the body tube. Now, sometimes when you get the body tube and you put the nose cone in, it's kind of sticky. I had that happen on a lot of rockets. I did the usual thing. I sanded and sanded the inside of the tube until it fit, but it made the top of the edge really thin and very, very weak. So sanding the tube weakens it dramatically. So again, we don't want to sand the tube. The problem is we want to sand off that edge. So once we sand off that edge, then the nose cone is too loose because it fits inside the tube and that little edge is gone. So there's a lot of things we have to do to prepare the two tubes, and chamfering is one of them. We want to take down this edge. When you're building the engine mount, you have to slide in the thrust ring. Sometimes it's really, really hard to get the thrust ring inside because of that little edges on it. Likewise on the body tube, besides the nose cone I just described, you try to put in the engine mount with the rings on it, it's sometimes hard to get it in there because this particular edge is in the way. So let's go ahead and fix that. It's really, really easy to do. You do it by taking a large round marker like this or any other type of round object. Just put it in and you press down the tube and roll, and press down the marker and just roll it along. So all we're doing is just rolling this like along the table. As we do so we are straightening out that manufacturing edge that's on there. You should be able to just very easily run your finger on this and say, oh yeah, that edge now is gone. And it really is smooth. I'm just going to do a little bit more in this one. Okay, so now this is very, very smooth. I'm going to do the other end. And now the nose cone should fit very easily into both of them. And we see it does. In fact, it's almost loose. Look at it, it's almost loose. But that's actually good. You can put some tape on the bottom of the nose cone, on the shoulder of the nose cone. It'll fit much more tightly. And same thing with this side here. But the nice thing is when you put the nose cone in, if that edge was still on there, every time you put the nose cone in, it would peel it inward. And eventually the top of it would fray. Or again, if you sand it off, then the top of it becomes very thin and very weak. So again, I've now fixed the body tube. Let's go ahead and fix this. This just barely fits inside. Now that little edge is gone. Just a little bit more. And press down really hard on the marker as you roll this along. Okay, that's nice and smooth now. And I'll do the other side. Okay, So now this is nice and smooth. And we should be able to tell if this is smooth by taking our engine ring, and it should just very easily fit inside, which it does. It just very easily fits inside. How many times have you tried to put an engine ring in and it's just really hard to get in there? And you sand and sand the inside of the edge and it's still hard to get in there. Then you sand the ring and the ring gets really worn. And now you've got two pieces of paper which have been sanded up, and then when you fit it in, it'll slide in here, but then it's too loose. So again, this now slides in very, very easily, and that indicates that we now have that edge taken down quite a bit. Okay. So this process is called chamfering. Again, I don't know if that's really used very often in model rocketry, even though it's a common term in carpentry. I've seen it only used a few times. I think the Dave Thomas video does talk about that once, maybe twice. But again, it's an important thing to do on all rockets. You have to remove that edge, otherwise the parts just don't fit that easily. It's much easier taking your nose cone and adding a ring of tape than it is trying to fix an edge that's been thinned out and gets worn. Okay, now let's take a look at the second one. Now the second one is extremely important. We're going to use CA glue. I happen to use the Gorilla Glue here. There's two different Gorilla Glues offhand. One of them is the gel kind. The other is the sometimes called the thin kind. It's thin, but it's not runny, so it's kind of an in-between. I know Apogee sells 3 different types of glue. A very thick, kind of like an intermediate, than what they call the watery type. This is thicker than the watery type, but a little bit thinner than their intermediates. But I use it just because it's simple and it's handy. I use this for almost everything. Super glue gel. I don't use this very often, but when I use it, it's very nice. I use this for attaching fins. There's a technique to attach the fins using a combination of super glue and tight bond glue. I'll cover that when I do the fins. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to treat the ends of the tubes. We're going to put this glue, a ring around the inside, then we're going to smooth it out, and then we're going to wipe it down to get off the excess. So the 3 steps that have to be done in somewhat rapid succession, because this glue does dry fairly fast. And of course, be careful not to stick your finger in there, otherwise the body tube becomes part of your finger. So, okay, let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to put a very thin bead along the inside. Okay, so if you see that, there's a bead of glue around the inside of that. I don't know if that's visible. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take a rod, and this rod already has got a bunch of glue on it. Use anything you want. I tip the tube upward so that the gravity helps pull the glue down, and just keep rotating this around. It'll smear the glue around on the inside. So this glue now is all smooth out around the end, and it converts the paper into more of a composite material. Namely, between the paper fibers, we now have a resin in between them. Now, what's important before this sets up too much, we want to take a paper towel and we want to wipe off the excess. In order to do this, we want to stick this in and move it very quickly and then take it out, otherwise you're going to glue paper inside your body tube. Okay, so now, let me see this. Okay, so now everything is okay on this end of the tube. You see that this has been treated. Again, unclear if I can show that if it's visible on camera, but the end of the tube has this wet look to it, but it's really just the glue soaking into the paper fiber. So now this is okay. So I'm going to do the other side real quickly. Now, it should be noted, ever since I started doing this, I've never had a case of a body being zippered, namely being cut back. Matter of fact, the famous Estes dent, where the nose cone shoots off and then the shock cord pulls it out and it bangs it into the top of the body tube. I've had many flights where the top of the body tube was just massively bent in by the nose cone snapping and hitting it. That doesn't happen if you treat it like this. It'll make it much more tough and much more resilient to those types of damage. Okay, so I put this in, and I'm going to just do the same thing. Just going to wipe it down. Now, notice wiping it down is important, because if you don't wipe it down, it's going to be kind of lumpy inside. So it's going to be lumpy, and when that dries, you're going to have to sand that down anyways. And sanding it when it's lumpy means it's going to sand unevenly. So it's just very important to do this wiping. So the other thing is that on this tube, after you do this treatment, the paper fiber will tend to stick up a little bit. So the paper fibers are going to tend to make the actual tube be a little bit more rough. And depending on your nose cone or your engine mount, whatever you're doing, that may be an issue. So you might want to just sand it afterwards, very, very lightly. Put it in, just spin it around. But keep in mind the paper fibers are going to stick up with this glue. And then again, you just need to smooth it out a little bit. So now this body tube is done. I'm just going to do the engine tube here real quickly. It's real easy to do as well. I'm going to go ahead and put a very, very, very tiny bead of glue on this. The important reason for doing the engine tube is that when you put the engine in and take it out many, many times, the edge of the tube becomes worn. The paper begins to fray, begins to pull apart a little bit. I've had one rocket, I had an alpha rocket when I first started building kits. I didn't do this, and after several flights, maybe it was a dozen flights, the end of the tube was so incredibly frayed that it was very, very hard to get the engine in. So I thought, well, I'll just sand that down. And while sanding something that's already frayed, all to do was make it worse. So the rocket eventually became almost completely unusable. But now you can see this is very, very nice and sealed. It's going to be a really nice way to put the engines and take it out. Nice and reliable type of construction. The same thing here. Again, very small bead of glue. Swirl it around. And now we're just going to wipe this down. That's all there is to it. Again, the two techniques are chamfering, which rolls the edge down, and the second one is CA treatment, which allows you to stiffen the fibers and make it much more rigid. After this is dry, I recommend letting this dry for at least an hour. The reason is it may seem dry, but if you try to stick things in there, some of the glue that's in the paper is going to come back out to your finger or to whatever object you stick in there, and it's going to stick it permanently. So you can let this dry for at least an hour. I usually put mine on a heat rack known as a lamp with an incandescent bulb. So I have a lamp with a standard 60-watt bulb from many, many years ago. All I do is just have a wire across the top and just hang this, or for this I'm just going to set this across the top of the lamp until everything gets nice and warm. Let it warm up for at least a good 15-20 minutes, or let it air dry for at least an hour. So again, you want to get this nice and dry, and then again afterwards you can stick your finger in there and you'll feel if it's rough. You may need to do a very, very light sanding, or if it's not rough, you can just or if everything fits, then you just probably don't need to do anything at all. I did find one thing is that sometimes I need to chamfer this a second time. So even after I put the glue in there, let it dry, you may have to chamfer this and rub this down because that little edge sometimes pulls back in with the glue. So again, two very important construction tips. I suggest doing this for every single rocket that you're planning on building. You'll make your rockets much more durable, much more reliable, and when the nose cone snaps off and snaps back, it's not going to make a dent because that's nice and hard. It's going to be really easy to put your engine mount in. By the way, on this particular rocket, it's got that tail cone. The tail cone needs something for the glue to grab onto. The paper doesn't grab onto as well, but it will grab onto this now because this is now treated with CA glue. So now it's got this nice strong material that almost any glue will bond onto. Okay, so go ahead, treat your tubes, and tomorrow or Saturday I'm going to start working on the engine mount. There's some options on the engine mount. I'll put that in the next video.